Okay, so passkeys. You know, every now and then, and by every now and then I mean at least once a month, I hear these new terms and these new acronyms sometimes, and all about this new technology that's going to be groundbreaking and it's going to change things. And if it happens once a month, it's kind of hard not to spend all your time chasing the new hotness and never get good at some other thing that we're supposed to be sitting there getting good at. And it's hard to know what actually matters, what's relevant. And so I would say when all the hubbub about passkeys first started, it's like, oh, Google, Microsoft, and Apple are all into this new thing. At first I was kind of like, does this matter? And so I guess over the course of the next hour, we're going to kind of figure out if this matters and whether or not Joel's demos will work. So it's not new technology, I would say, is one thing to think of. And I will often over-index on history because I'm a history nerd. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to just zip through a couple of these slides. The biometrics slide, the most important takeaway from here is we've been doing this since the 1960s, and it's just slowly, progressively gotten better. So much so that in 2004, Bill Gates predicted the death of the password, which then immediately happened, or not. And then elsewhere, you know, we started biometrics in '64, but we actually started using passwords in 1960, and not that much has changed. I mean, we salt them, we encrypt them. A lot of us in the software development world don't want to store them in our databases anymore. We want to do that as a service, like use Auth0 or something like that. The first patent from AT&T was filed in 1996, and we'll post all these slides, so if I'm skipping a bunch of these bullets, I left them there for posterity. I was like, I did the research, I should leave them there, but I didn't think most people really care. But one of the important things here is that WebAuthn was proposed in 2013. So if we flash forward to 2022, when passkeys were initially announced, then we're a solid decade almost in. And what really matters, I think, to the people in this room is more the history of the biometrics within Apple, or within Apple products. So Keychain was released for the Mac in 1999 for OS 8.6. And I would say architecturally, it hasn't had that many changes. Obviously, the code would have had to change, but it's an encrypted SQLite database, just like nearly every password manager on the market. The iPhone 5S then brought biometric sensors onto devices in 2013, and we'd had little tinkerations with that kind of thing before then, but that was the first time that we got true biometric sensors. And then the Mac got the Touch Bar in 2016, Face ID on the iPhone in 2017, and the Magic Keyboard then brought it to the place where we could have it on the full product line in 2021, just in time, or JIT delivery, for passkey support to be introduced in 2022. So passwords, tokens, and passkeys. So FIDO2 was introduced in 2018, and this represented a pretty substantial step from FIDO1. And passkeys are just an implementation of FIDO2 standard, which is why the title of the presentation is Passkeys are with a lowercase p and not an uppercase p. I got a thumbs up from Joel. Does that mean that the demo's working, or does that mean?
Sure.
The man behind the curtain, aka Oz. Instead of being a instead of being a hardware token like the old YubiKeys were, these new passkeys could be credentials that could live on multiple devices. And so we'll go through some of the flows on how we share them. Joel just broke the tip off one of the bananas, so now we have 29 to give away. So passkeys can be cross-platform as well. The cross-platform flows I find janky, but they work, and they're perfectly secure from what I can tell. And then in 2022, we got that first session. I'm sure everyone saw this session from WWDC, but Meet Passkeys, where he went through how to put them on web pages, things of that nature, but we didn't get APIs until about 3 or 4 weeks ago that actually would compile and run on production devices. And then Google introduced support for passkeys in 2022. So up until Google introduced support, I had still been kind of slow rolling my testing and development efforts. When Google introduced support, it was like, okay, there might only be 30 or 40 websites that actually support passkeys, but one of them's Google. And not all Google sites, but a lot of Google sites. The flows from Google were also the first time that I saw good flows. So I'll explain what I mean by good flows and bad flows later. But before, there were all these janky ways to make passkeys work, if I can say janky. And after, I think there are some pretty decent workflows that, that support passkeys. So in the Google flow, you log into your Google page, you click Create a Passkey from Account Security, you click Continue, you give your fingerprint, and you got a passkey. It's that easy. It's just, it works. Well, it's that easy when it works. You still have to know your Google password. And then from the accounts page, you can verify that you got a passkey. And if you click the X, you can delete the passkey or revoke the passkey, as the case may be. And then you can repeat that process in Chrome. So at this point, we've got a passkey for our device, but it's in our Apple password manager. Sorry. So I made some changes and they didn't sync. Eric Dreyer will lovingly look at this and be like, at least you have your images in your presentation, for those who were here for that one. So because we did this and we're using iCloud Keychain, we don't have to do this exact same process on the iPhone. The passkey just shows up and works on the iPhone. And then other vendors started to introduce passkey support. Rippling, they have a password manager that lives in Chrome. They added passkey support for that in 2023, but they also added passkey support for all their web pages in addition. So that was the first one that I saw where it was a vendor with actual passkey support. And it's fairly simple, just like we saw before. The one thing I would say here is you have to use Chrome when setting it up, but once you've got it set up, you're good to go. And again, you just hit a web page. But if you notice here, we say a QR code. And this QR code will not work if you're trying to scan it right now and hack me, just so you know. Because they time out. The reason you see the QR code is because if you were to be trying to use this passkey on an Android device, then that's how you would transfer it to Android, because it's not using iCloud Keychain as well. And so passkeys in action. This is where Joel comes into play.
Thank you, Charles. So we wanted to kind of show you some of the new APIs that are in iOS 17 and in macOS 14 that make using passkeys within Safari and your native apps and other things a lot easier. So, passkey support for third parties. You've always had passkeys in Safari and in Chrome for a little while, right? And as Charles mentioned, there have been some extensions, one login, one password, those kinds of things that allow you to do this with browsers. New again to iOS 14 and macOS 14, iOS 17. We'll get that right, dyslexia strikes. They ride in on the same password autofill systems that you have with passwords, and you can now add third parties to it. And so we're going to show you that. For this, I put together a little app that exercises this, and I did use AI for that graphic. You're not maybe surprised by that. And if I can get this, where's Control Center? Over here, share. There we go, screen mirroring. It's going to do it. There it goes. All right, so now, here, there you go, cool. So you can see my screen, and we'll do view somewhere in here, it's preferences. Oh, it goes back into here. This is a fun little app I really like for doing this. And I thought somewhere in here it would show only this screen so you could see it all. But you'll get the idea here. It'll just be a little messy in the back end. So I have my favorite phone here with my case that I like. You can buy these on Alibaba. When they show up, they smell of illegal chemicals and child labor. But other than that, it's designed to be a stress-relieving case, I guess. It is a little awkward to hold, and people will find you weird. But hey, that's life, right? So first of all, here's where you can actually add in any of your third-party password managers. Keep in mind that there's a couple of rules to this. The first one is you can turn on and off iCloud, and you can turn on and off one third party. All right, so you can't have Keeper, Octapersonal, Google, Chrome, and all that at the same time. You can only have one third party one in addition to iCloud. Of course, none of this is manageable via MDM or anything, because why would that make our lives easy? Users will be able to choose this. It's a kind of a similar flow on the Mac as well that you can go in here. And I can go to one of my favorite apps. So this is webauthn.me that allows you to create on-the-fly WebAuthn credentials. And they've got a debugger in here that works out really well. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. And I'm just going to hit register. And this is how you know you've got a third-party password manager available to do credentials. So here you can see I've got my Passtash app, and I can choose between that or iCloud Keychain as I go through this. So that's pretty cool that I've got those options. I'm going to pick my own, and boom, I just created a passkey that's right here. Now, a couple of things about this. If I go over to my app, you can see I've got a brand new one. And if I click on this, I'll actually be able to see, and if you write this down, that's a real passkey. That's a P256 private key. Shh, but it's only good on that one page, so if you really want to copy it, you can copy it. But here you can see that because of the third-party introduction of passkeys, a little bit about what Charles is talking about the history and some of the stuff that he's going to talk about next, get a little weird, right? In most cases when you're using a passkey, there's kind of a requirement to have user verification or user presence. Since I'm a credential provider, I can lie about both of those, all right? So I can determine user presence and user verification just by flipping on and off these switches here in the app, all right? So keep that in mind as you do start thinking about third parties. They're all gonna be able to do different things with passkeys that may be a little bit different than what you're expecting or what you're used to having happen with a YubiKey or something else that's a little more hardware backed. The other thing that I can do, all of these keys are actually being synchronized up to my other phone. I only had one banana case though, so I only brought out the one. Synchronized to my other phone. In the original use case of FIDO keys, those were supposed to be hardware backed, right? So if you had a YubiKey, there's no way of sharing those keys on your YubiKey with another person or another device. They were hardware locked into that system. Now that we've gone to passkeys, now that we have it through APIs, it's a little more loose as to where everything is going and what's actually happening here, right? So goods and bads. Goods are, you may have a lot of interesting opportunities. For example, I built this app and I can actually keep my keys in the cloud. So I do have a high security module that I have up there. I can actually never have that passkey reach my phone. Instead, it'll only be in my cloud service, be unable to be synchronized, and unable to be used by anything that isn't one of my other devices that I have signed in. So there are some very cool features like that. The other cool thing that we can do, since we do have everything up, I'm just gonna open up a browser real quick. Always dangerous, but we're gonna go with this. And I am gonna go to, and since we're doing this live, this is gonna work out great. I'm going to do to webauthn.me, and I'm going to go to that same page that I do some debugging on. Thank you, European Union. I really appreciate every time I load a web page here, I have to agree. I know there's some Chrome extensions that will solve that for me, but cool. So I'm going here, and I'm going to go click on register, and I'm going to say use a different device, and I'm going to say use iPhone, and now I can come up to here, and if you're not aware of, Apple has a dedicated QR code reader that you can use. If you don't want to just use the camera, that's this little guy here. So I can actually scan this QR code. Come on, find a code. There we go. And I'm actually going to be able to make a FIDO key on my phone using my third-party credential provider that's then going to go through. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Boom. I had that authentication. And now, here is my FIDO key on the Mac, having been come through the phone. It uses a combination of Bluetooth and the internet. It's actually pretty clever, the security that's involved in this. But it does make it very, very easy to use your FIDO keys from different systems, passkeys, I should say. It makes it very easy to use your passkeys from another system on here and go through that process. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mr. Edge. We're going to go back to the slides. There you go.
All right, so other flows. I mentioned other flows. So here's a typical flow that I've seen a bunch of times from a random app that Joel and I don't endorse. In fact, I very much recommend you don't use it. I only installed it because it had passkey support, and I was looking for something that matched, and now I get a lot of spam. And I love getting a lot of spam when I install an app. So in this context, you log into a website. You then have to go to a special page to manage passkeys and create a passkey. And it took me about 5 minutes, and anything in an app that takes like 5 minutes to figure out how to do is a huge UX fail. But I did eventually figure it out. And so you add a new passkey, it shows up, and then the app just works. Now, the problem with these legacy flows, though, is I've already cached the password for the app into the app. So what is the benefit to me if I only engage with an app through through that to actually go back and replace my authentication method with the passkey? Like, it's 5 minutes of extra work to then get almost no extra benefit from. So that's one of the issues that I have with these bad flows. I think with good flows, it's all fine. But anyway, so simple enough so far. You saw a bunch of nerdy stuff from Joel, as Joel often shows. Up on the screen, when he got his passkey, there was all this stuff. And what was that? So the origin story of this presentation is Joel and I both wanted to start building passkey support into tools. And when we sat down to do it, we work at different places, but we were kind of nerding out together. And the next thing we know, we had figured out, Joel mentioned that the credential provider, one of those options was to disable the fact that user presence has to be there. So, we started wondering, what if we built our own credential provider and we called it a coupon app? And then what if that coupon app could then intercept passkeys and replay them instead of being, 1Password or something like that? And then a few weeks later, we had some working code, some stuff that mostly worked if you stood on a chair and held your arm out like an old TV antenna and so we submitted that to Black Hat, and then Black Hat came back and said, well, this is an issue with the spec and it's by design, so we don't really want that presentation, but Mac sysadmin will take it. So here you go. But we can't see much about this passkey stuff in the typical places that we started poking around, looking for, what is going where when Apple implements some of this. So keychain access, I think Apple's made it pretty clear that we should be managing our passwords in system settings, not in keychain access anymore. I don't think that this bodes well for the long term of keychain. It's perhaps being put out to pasture at some point. It's lived a very long, good life in the software world, but perhaps not for too much longer. So in system settings, though, not in system preferences, we see a whole bunch of passkey information. These are probably too small to see, but hopefully everyone's seen these screens. And when we go to a site where we've got a passkey, it shows us that we've created that. I used webauthn.io as one example. Another great takeaway from this would be if you haven't experimented with webauthn.io to see all the fun things that they can show you. It's an awesome reference implementation. I use it for testing quite a bit. And then also here's the Google one. So if you notice in the Google one, there's a username, a password, and a passkey option. So it's going to choose the best one, which is a great implementation or flow. And then you can share them. This is the part where I start wondering. You know, shareable, Joel mentioned that these used to be token bound. The idea of sharing that token, like if you have a credential that'll get into anything, then would you hand, and it was all tied to a token, would you hand that token to, who might you actually share that token with? Regrettably, my teenager's asking for things, and while I trust her, I don't know that I trust her to know what she's then authenticating to. So there are chain of custody issues in my mind here. But yeah, you can share, and now that it's in Chrome, we start to see stuff in keychain access. I thought we deleted the slide, but anyway, so we mentioned that you need passkeys for each password or each credential provider being a password manager. In fact, the APIs are often just called credential provider.something from Apple. So passkeys are managed from settings, autofill, manage passkeys for Chrome, and in this case, Chrome is a credential provider. And you can see that in the right, there's a whole bunch of passkeys. I will often have dozens from webauthn.io up just because testing, you generate them and they die within 24 hours. But under the hood, all of this stuff is called navigator.credentials.something. So APIs are application programming interfaces. Here we're talking to a website, and that website understands navigator.credentials.something. And so when we first started looking at passkeys, Apple didn't have the APIs. And so we were kind of making it up as we went. And well, we understand WebAuthn. This is all documented. Apple might not have released documentation, but you know, let's figure out what we can do. So you know, you go to webauthn.guide, and they've got lots of documentation for how it works. And so you just start putting a proxy, let's say. You just load up Charles Proxy, you say, and by the way, I did not write Charles Proxy, but you're welcome. But you load up Charles Proxy, you start looking at traffic as it's going back and forth, and you know, you realize, you know, I can intercept or override these endpoints. So what I sat down and did was make a Chrome extension. Regrettably, OpenAI wasn't as much a thing, so I didn't just have OpenAI make it for me. Today I might have tried that first. But making a Chrome extension is really easy. I created a listener, and here you can see that all this is doing is listening to all browser traffic that's going through Chrome. And then a pop-up. If you see navigator.credentials.create, so if someone makes a passkey, then grab that traffic. Don't try to grab it all, because that's a fire hose of traffic. And then once you get that, and you see that just in this little simple JavaScript, once you get that, display it in a modal in Chrome. And so here's a script that then takes that data, displays it in that modal, and then gives me the ability to copy that text, hit OK, and have the process complete. And this is up on my GitHub. There will be a link later in the session. And then we load the extension. It's unsigned, so you probably shouldn't load it. But I loaded it, made the passkey again, and boom. Actually, this is not the modal. I made a second version that just dumps it to a JSON file so that I could then try to replay it. But here we see that raw data, and this is what a passkey basically is at the end of the day, is just a JSON blob with some stuff. And that stuff is explained at webauthn.guide. But that then led me to, well, if I can see this stuff, can I then replay this stuff? And we're in June, maybe July at this point. And so here, invert the code, and basically here's a modal that asks me for my passkey. Paste the passkey in, just like this, from that JSON, and then it prompts me for my fingerprint, and I go. I could then, as the credential provider, say, oh, it doesn't require a fingerprint. Don't do that. That's not the flows that I was after, but as Joel mentioned, that's possible. And what's cool about browser extensions is I really like the telemetry that we have into other tools. So if you notice, Joel had all these other credential providers like Keeper or something else. When we load those up on our Mac, we can then just look at what their extension's doing because they're raw JavaScripts. So here, I don't remember which one this is, but this is some credential providers' raw JavaScript from a Chrome extension. And if you notice, the title that they gave their JavaScript was injected passwordless.js. And this kind of tells us the mode of thinking. So Google, Microsoft, and Apple announce in this big thing that makes it in the Wall Street Journal, et cetera. And as a product manager, you're like, oh, shiny new thing. Got to chase that. Because that's what product managers are paid to do. I get a big thumbs up from Tom. But in this case, now you've got investors on your board at companies, who are autofill providers, like a 1Password. They've got Ryan Reynolds out there. They've got a bunch of money on the line that they have to protect. And all of a sudden, their investors are saying, well, the passwordless future, how do you fit in if you're a password manager? And they're like, passkeys support. That's how we do it. And so there was this big rush for all of us, including Joel and myself, to figure out how this worked. And I think in the end, Joel and I decided to slow roll it for a couple months and wait for Apple APIs because we figured we'd eventually get them. But in the process, I did a couple of other presentations on extensions and how dangerous extensions can be. So you noticed that I was just grabbing all traffic and parsing out the traffic with my Chrome extension to just work with passkeys. But I could have also just said, I want all your traffic to go to my little proxy, and I'm going to borrow any username and password that you type in that screen. So we have to be careful with extensions. So up on my GitHub is also this little tool called Extensions Manager. For those of you who haven't used OS 8.6, that was the tool that was available in the classic operating system to manage extensions that I missed. And I called this Extensions Manager mostly because I wanted a cease and desist letter from Apple to frame and hang on my wall at home. That has not come yet, but if there's anyone that could help me, no, I'm kidding. So with 24 minutes remaining, we have thoughts. And I would say my first thought is passkeys are a thing, and they're only going to become more ubiquitous. Would you agree with that?
100%. And as we've gone through this, we've kind of talked about how you can kind of hack passkeys a little bit and maybe have a little bit fun with them. But make no mistake, we both unequivocally believe that passkeys are the future, all right? No matter how much hijinks we can play with passkeys, you can do all of that and a lot more with a password, right? And some of this is why, Charles poked a little bit of fun over being able to airdrop a passkey, which at first seems a little bit awkward and weird, right? Because again, if you came from having YubiKeys and things like that, you would expect that to be not a behavior that you would find actually put in by a vendor. But Apple is very unashamedly wanting to make passkeys as simple to use as passwords. And they know that passwords are bad, passwords are easy to crack, passwords are phishable, there's a lot of other pieces to that. And so if passkeys have that just ease of use, if grandma can use a passkey and feel comfortable doing it, then security has been raised across the board. And so again, no matter what we've kind of maybe found, some of the rough edges and some of the other interesting things here, I very much agree passwords are the way forward. For the systems that I use, if there's a passkey option, I said that wrong. Passkeys are the way forward. Thank you, Andrew was calling me out on that. So if I have an option to make a passkey for a service, I'm 1,000% gonna pick that before figuring out some password that I've probably used again that Safari is now gonna yell at me has been seen in 28 breaches and all the rest.
Which of your passwords have been seen in 28 breaches?
I don't know.
You mentioned phishing.
I did.
Luckily, it was perfectly on time, as though we planned this, which we didn't. Are they more phishing resistant in your mind?
100% they are. When Charles showed you those slides of looking at a passkey in your keychain, they are locked to a relying party. So in the passkey parlance, you're going to see that referred to as RP, and that relying party is typically the web page that you're signing into. So apple.com or accounts.google.com or something along those lines. As long as you're not using a really sketchy browser, all of the browsers are only going to allow you to use a passkey that's locked into that accounts.google.com or whatever URL that was originally created with that passkey. This makes it extremely phishing proof. It's not, you'll notice none of them say, well, extremely phishing resistant. Very few people ever say phishing proof. Very hard to prove an absolute, right? So there may be ways of getting around this, but in general, they're very phishing resistant, and the browsers themselves keep track of where those connections are coming from. And with that, you should feel very good about having those passkeys and using that in lieu of a password. And also for your users, right? If you've been through a phishing attack, you know it's really not the user fault. Some of those phishing attempts are really, really good now. Some of the phishing training is getting really good that just makes your users angry. But then there's also the real phishing attacks that are good as well. So passkeys are definitely 1,000% better and are very much more phishing resistant than passwords ever were.
Agree. So we mentioned legacy flows. I think there's one that I'll skip later, but we can add it to this spot right here. Origin, problems with the origination of the password and the fact that there's a password and a passkey. I have noticed that I don't see almost any credential provider treating a passkey different than they treat a password in terms of how it's surfaced in the GUI, how it's provided, how it's handed out. But initially, we create an account and we get a thing, the origin of that account. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, it's this is probably one of the bigger problems with passkeys today, is that very few services allow you to start with a passkey from scratch, right? If you're signing in to your favorite IDP, if you're going to, I don't know why, but people use bestbuy.com as an example of this, because it was one of the first sites to use passkeys. It's probably not very popular here in the Nordics. I don't think you have Best Buy.
They don't sell here.
They don't sell here. So you have to create an account first. And a lot of these legacy flows for creating accounts are predicated on having a password. So until you could have a passkey, you had to have a password associated with that site, which just made the whole thing seem kind of silly, right? Weird, awkward. So you're starting to see more and more sites that if you are generating a brand new account and you're starting off from scratch, you can create a passkey in there, but a lot of them will start with a password, which is a little bit confusing for users, and again, also kind of defeats the purpose. There's another aspect to here is that if you are using passkeys, you're much more secure, everything's great, that's perfect, but there's probably a legacy recovery flow. If you're using a credential provider that's saving all your passkeys in the cloud, that's doing some synchronization, that's really cool, right? Even iCloud is an example of this. But iCloud has a recovery flow that doesn't involve a passkey, right? And many times that recovery flow goes back to having a password. iCloud is good about this because you've got your circle of trust. You have to use one of your devices to unlock it on another device. So they've got some really good protections in there from the Apple side. But some of the others, it's just send an email to a recovery link. And if you can click that recovery link, then all these passkeys are now back under your control, which then starts to make you have some questions around how do we protect this gatekeeper back into these credential providers that then can have all of our passkeys in there. So that's a little bit of the kind of, I don't know, rocky bits that you're seeing as a lot of the industry moves away from passwords. These legacy flows had a lot of password focus, and it's just taking a little bit of time for developers, for applications to just understand that maybe there is a different way, maybe there is a better way of using non-password related authentication.
But I have yet to see one that has 0 passwords. They all go back to a username and a password. So the passwordless future is a buzzword for the New York Times, not a reality.
Which is fantastic, Charles, because we can have sessions on passwordless future here at Mac Sysadmin for maybe the next 5 to 10 years, where we will still be talking about how we can get to a passwordless world.
And maybe by then we'll have management options, which we'll get to in a moment.
Maybe. Let's not be hasty.
So you beat me to this one, but you can only have one third-party autofill provider at a time. I struggled with this because at first I was like, oh, that's a huge miss. But then I was like, what if I did load our fake coupon app and I was able to now intercept? I would have to break 1Password in the process, and the user would have to disable 1Password and enable my fake coupon app in order for me to complete this exploit. So, or I don't know if I'd even call that an exploit, just a fake coupon app. But I think I've come to grips with this is the right call, and the developers who made this option work, solid choice. I don't know. We hadn't talked about it, so.
I agree with Charles in that from a simplicity perspective, this makes it a lot easier. It is a little confusing. You saw when I did the demo, you actually have a switch that you can pick between one credential provider or the other. And having multiple credential providers active at the same time is probably not the best user experience, especially for someone who's maybe not that excited about passwords in the first place, right? So now that I got to pick, where do I send it? What do I do with it? The downside is if you do have your favorite password manager and they are set up for autofill in Safari, but they don't support passkeys, you can't have an autofill support that does passwords and then another third-party one just to do passkeys. So that's probably what I find the biggest downside of only being able to have one in there.
And like you mentioned, it would be very easy to have like an MDM, a configuration profile that just selects which one is enabled by domain of.
We've heard that from a lot of enterprise environments. You want to be able to lock somebody in. And I think this would be really a fantastic feature for large organizations, right? Because a lot of times you probably do some work in Chrome to ensure that whatever password manager that your organization has picked is the only one where secrets can go into, right? There's some benefits to that. You have control of it, you have auditability. If that user goes away, if they get quit, you can go back in and make sure you have access to those services. And so by not providing a management profile or anything else like that for Safari, you're a little bit limited on that. And then plus, as we might hear later on this week, some of the newer Apple features on managed Apple IDs also factor into this.
Oh.
Ah, look at that.
Oh.
It's the next slide.
Yeah. So we mentioned developers don't have to do some things. So here, this guy, what's your name? Joel, mentioned that user presence is a traditional, like, I don't think you could disable that in FIDO.
You have to have it.
In the FIDO2 tokens, obviously, you know, you're present because you inserted your token. But we can disable that requirement with passkeys. So I think as we get to a point where we're managing the policies of these, if we're not using iCloud Keychain as our only credential provider, and we're choosing to use a third-party one, and I'm going to guess that now that MDM is very adjacent as a market to credential providers, which is very adjacent as a market to IDPs, we're going to start seeing some consolidation in these spaces, potentially. So if different providers can disable different features, then now we're going to have a rubric by which we're now judging which features we need. And the ability to turn off user attestation, user presence, etc. Like, I don't think I would want to work with a vendor that does that, especially not if it's my coupon app. No one should work with that.
Absolutely, very much agree with that. What I do like here with some of the newer Apple APIs, as you saw me, I shared a passkey, or I created a passkey on my phone from a QR code on the Mac. I didn't write any of that code. It was really nice that Apple provides that level for doing the Bluetooth handshake and the other pieces that go into that. It's a really nice flow, and it's really slick flow. And this is actually the demo that I do for anyone that doesn't believe in passkeys just yet. Take your phone just with iCloud. You don't need any third-party password managers. Go to one of these sites that we've been talking about, webauthn.io, webauthn.me. There's a couple of them that will allow you to just create whatever random keys. Do that on your phone. Immediately go over to a PC, go to that same page and authenticate with the key on your phone. Chrome or Edge on your PC will show up a QR code. You shoot it with your phone, you do some stuff on the phone, and you're going to get signed into that page on the Windows system. And it is a really magical experience to see that. Because the idea of trying to synchronize passwords cross-platform and getting all that together and just being able to pick a Windows PC up out of the box without even signing in to whatever you're using to synchronize passwords and being able to sign in is pretty cool. From an IT admin perspective, there's probably some interesting things here for if you're sitting down at a user system, they want to sign into a page, or you need to sign into a page to get some of your admin tools or something else in there. Being able to shoot it with your phone and being able to authenticate in is actually maybe a pretty interesting piece. Because the last thing you want to do is to type your admin password on that user system, especially when they've signed in as themselves.
Just don't forget to delete your passkey when you're done.
Well, your passkey will still be saved on the phone.
Oh, right. You lost me on your...
That's okay.
So we mentioned MAID support came, or iCloud Keychain support came to MAIDs with Sonoma. So can a user with a personal Apple ID later sign in with a MAID and get passkeys? So there's some other flows that we're still working through, I guess, is the point here. And especially if we created data that then some other piece of data is going to need to override. Like, I understand the reluctance of developers to then force that. But the MAID must be the primary account holder, I guess.
Yeah. And this is where we're still very interested in getting a little more into the weeds here, because I think some of the managed Apple ID functionality didn't even hit with the release of Sonoma, right? That some of it was in lice type down at the bottom coming later, or in October, which is now October, so maybe we haven't. So we can ask some of our Apple friends.
Our luck, it showed up yesterday.
Yes.
And we didn't notice.
We can ask some of our Apple friends when they come in. But new to managed Apple IDs, right, because this was a big problem with passkeys previously. If you'd bought into the dream of Apple IDs and managed Apple IDs, you couldn't have an iCloud keychain associated with a managed Apple ID. If you didn't have an iCloud keychain, you wouldn't be able to actually save passkeys in that iCloud keychain. And then sad panda, you can't actually use passkeys with a managed Apple ID, right? So with the input of the third-party providers here that we've just showed you here, I don't have to have an iCloud account. So if you do have a third-party provider, you can now provide passkeys in Safari, specifically on iOS, right, without having iCloud. So that's really cool. And then we're also looking forward to what the managed Apple IDs are going to be able to do and allow you to do that for your own users. There also is a whole layer of attestation that can happen with managed Apple IDs if you go through an Acme flow and set up some Acme certificates. Expect some sessions on that probably in a year when some of that dust settles as to how to put all those pieces together.
Yeah, because all this is built on top of all those things that I skipped over in the history slides, like the introduction of certificates, the introduction of all these other random bits of technology. It all sits on top of each other in this like fantastic little identity ecosystems. So you used a word earlier, secrets, you know, instead of passwords or passkeys. And so we now have all these passwords. We have this platform SSO that you're talking about later in this conference, I believe. Keys, certificates, passkeys. So super quick blip, platform SSO, is it a thing?
Sure.
All right.
Come tomorrow and find out. Little forward throw into that.
So any other thoughts?
I wanted to do a show of hands. We always like to do this, even though it's really bad for the people that are online. Who's got passkeys now that they're using? As of 5 minutes ago, all right. We've made a convert out of pair. This is really exciting. So about half the room, a little bit more, raised their hands. So that's really cool. I think if we did that same question just 12 months ago, not that we were in person and we couldn't have done it, but if we did, my guess it'd probably only a quarter of the people. How many people are only using passkeys? Yeah, zero hands. At this point in time, there's pretty much zero way that you could only have passkeys, which is a little bit unfortunate. To sign into your Mac, you still have to have a password. So at least at that base level, you're always going to have a password until we can get a better way of doing that. And that'll be another couple of sessions whenever that comes out.
The future is passwordless, not the present.
The future is passwordless, not the present. That's very much true. So who's excited about passkeys? All right, let the audience at home see.
Who was excited before we got on stage?
Man. We've made some impact. We've made some impact, so that's good. So definitely go to those sites. I think we got here a bunch of links. You can take pictures of it. Apple's got some documentation.
And we'll post this.
We'll post these, so you don't even have to take pictures. But Apple's got a bunch of documentation on passkeys on the developer site. So you can go there, take a look at some of the pieces. And then here's a slew of third-party bits that can give you some good information on that. WebAuthn.guide is really great. WebAuthn.io. I'm also a personal fan of WebAuthn.me. It's a little bit more of a debugger. But if you want to see the actual bits going across the wire, WebAuthn.me is really good for that. Shows you all the CBOR, concise binary object. I forget what the R is. Anyway, so you can see all that in all its glory, and you'll go, oh my God, this is crazy. And it is. And then down at the bottom, this is the stuff that Charles has been working on that he showed off, the Extensions Manager app for that, and then some stuff that he did most of the work, but I think I provided some thoughts, which is the WebAuthn Inspector. So if you actually want to see the actual passkey work going on in your browser, as long as it's a Chrome-based browser, Safari gets very angry at you if you try to do that.
So yeah, Safari, and this is regrettably one of the slides that went missing. Yep. So Safari, from day one, has blocked the ability to override the navigator.credentials.star endpoints. So what we're doing when we're talking about overriding, there's a JavaScript function to override a function and intercept what's passing through it. Safari, in a very intelligent, and I couldn't believe that they did this, way, blocked the ability to override JavaScript functions. And Safari extensions, all browser extensions are just JavaScripts. Crappy little or hopefully good little, but mostly crappy little JavaScripts. And with Chrome, I can override those. With Safari, I couldn't. And actually, the engineering manager for Safari posted something about this on Mastodon last week, calling out all the autofill providers, the third parties, and saying, hey, we didn't do this with Safari. And you're like, well, you had early access to all the APIs, so of course you didn't, But yeah, that's been, so those two, we also did a interview with Matt Miller from Cisco, your former, I'm pointing at Ed because he used to work at Duo, coworker. But we interviewed him. He's the guy behind, or one of the people behind WebAuthn.io. Very awesome resource. But yeah.
Cool. And with that?
With that, we have 3 minutes. Any questions real quick, or do you want us to just get off stage? Rich? And the answer to your first question that you haven't asked yet, Rich, is yes, we will be adding a section on this into our book for the next edition.
Awesome, there's going to be a next edition.
You heard it here.
Third edition. So one of the things I'm particularly excited about with passkeys is that it'll simplify a lot of the security overhead quite a bit. What are your thoughts on MFA going away as passkey adoption becomes more prevalent?
Well, passkey is MFA by virtue, I guess.
Well, say...
More traditionally, I mean, part of the paradigm is the biometric requirement. So I have my phone. I authenticate into my phone by the virtue of the fact that I started that flow on my laptop. Now there's 2 pieces of information, I guess.
Yeah, the idea of a passkey is that it's something which is where that user verification, or at least that user presence, comes in, because you've validated the user, and then it's something you have, which is this passkey that's in there. Gets a little bit weird now that everything's being synchronized in the cloud, and that kind of very hardware-backed token aspect originally has gone away. My guess is that you're going to see a lot more shops, a lot more IDPs, a lot more apps just saying passkeys are fine. We really, who likes having 18 different MFA apps? Who likes still getting text messages for MFA, right? I think the ability, if we've got something that's arguably better than all these other flows, and just a few people get convinced that it is multi-factor inherently in itself, and then yes, passkey is a single factor.
However, if you want to force at least 2 devices, there's an app called secretchest.io, but really there is.
Until you have bad passkey providers, and then they become less strong factors. Out of order. We've already broken.
Yeah, you already broke it.
All right, fantastic. Our job here is done.
So with 48 seconds left.
48 seconds. Hey.
Not that I'm keeping track. You're keeping track. I'm not.
Thank you for the great speech. I was wondering if biometrics is a requirement for using this. You won't be able to use these for kind of service accounts or when systems are talking to each other?
So the question is biometrics a requirement for this? Depends on how you read the passkey spec. If you're the credential provider, if you notice some of the first times I used my app, there was no biometric requirement. So that, again, traditional FIDO that passkeys started from, biometrics were at least a big part of it. User presence was a requirement, which would make it a lot harder for service accounts. That's been changed, and certainly with the ubiquity of passkeys, I think you're going to see a lot of people just starting to use it. In the OAuth OpenID Connect flow, you would call this client credentials, which is effectively just a private key that you have signing a JWT to generate tokens. So there already are existing flows that are like that. They're just not quite called passkeys.
And I'll add, as an app, when we go to prompt for a biometric to create an entry into a password provider, we don't actually have to prompt. We can skip that first one because we already know that you are that thing. because you're already authenticated to that thing. We don't have to prompt until you go to use it later. So that's why with some of the credential providers, you might see, oh, I created an entry, and it's actually using your biometrics, but it's using a cached biometric to create the entry, as opposed to when you go to summon that thing that you created, that object, now we need to get that in order to substantiate the recall of it. I don't know if that makes sense.
This is really cool. They're giving us more time.
Oh.
The clock is going up. Every second we have more time to talk. This is fantastic.
So, thank you guys.
Thank you.
It's been very interesting.